Hi, everyone. My name is Louis Retief. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Hubli. And today we're going to be talking about the best practices for meeting prep and follow-ups for client check-ins. I see that we have a number of existing Hubli customers on the call, so glad to have all of you here. And as Tessa said, thank you to all of the FPA chapter members who are also in attendance today. So the webinar today builds upon a previous webinar that we actually did on the fundamentals of the financial planning process. And so over the last 3 months, we've worked with over 300 advisors and support team members to basically develop these best practices for managing follow-ups and check-ins. And so I hope today's webinar is going to provide additional context and light on some of the core issues that all advisory firms struggle with. And hopefully it will help you determine some ways how to retain and provide value to your clients long term. Ultimately, our goal at Hubli is to share as much knowledge as possible with the advisor community. And for us to be able to share those best practices is an honor. And today we'll be diving into it. To give everyone an idea of the topics we're going to be covering, we're going to start off with a little speaker background. For those who don't know me yet, I'll be doing a little background on myself and how Hubli got started. After that, I'm going to be talking about some of the industry trends and opportunities that are currently happening. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of these industry trends and opportunities if you follow Michael Kitz's or other thought leaders in the space. But most importantly, we'll get into it and we'll be talking about best practices to streamline client reviews and check-ins. With that being said, a little background on myself. For those who don't know, prior to co-founding Hubli, I actually worked at a well-known robo-advisor. And in my role there, I helped design and build technology that brought efficiency, automation, scalability, you name it, buzzword to investment advice. And I was really young and naive back then, and I really believed that robo-advisors were the future and that they were going to replace all human advisors. But the longer and longer I worked there, I quickly started to realize that it was near impossible to code away the human element of financial advice. And the one thing I learned is that it doesn't matter how much automation we implemented as a technology company, people always wanted to talk to a human. And this is for me really when the seed was planted and I became obsessed with the future of financial advice. And we started the journey as a team and we tried to figure out is if we're not going to eliminate the human advisor from helping people make good quality financial decisions, then how is the role of the advisor and the services you provide going to fundamentally change in order for you to stay competitive and differentiate your services in the long run? Over the course of co-founding Hubli, I've spoken to hundreds and hundreds of advisors across the country. And there seems to be this continuous pattern and problem that advisors and their teams struggle with. They all tell me that they want to basically create a more service model that is more personalized and delivers value to clients long term. However, they don't know how to organize their operations to do it efficiently. And so at Hubli, we believe that there are basically 3 key industry trends that are driving this challenge. And the 3 trends I'll be walking through is 1, becoming your client's financial quarterback. 2 is focusing on servicing a specific client niche. And 3 is how to turbocharge your operational excellence. And so when it comes to becoming your client's financial quarterback, there seems to be this continued push towards being a project manager for your client's finances. And historically, financial advisors have just managed investments or just done insurance. But there's a continuous push towards providing this comprehensive service and project managing multiple aspects of your client's finances and almost acting as a household CFO. However, what this means is that you're now responsible for managing multiple aspects of your client's financial lives and no longer providing a singular service. You can almost think of it as a general practitioner for healthcare versus a specialized health surgeon. And I think McKinsey actually stated the trend really well here is in the next 10 years, advisors will gradually shed their role as investment managers and become more like integrated life or wealth coaches for their clients. And so the reason what this is basically happening is because there's this push towards a integrated wealth coach or financial quarterback for your clients, what you see advisors doing is they're starting to differentiate themselves by focusing on a client niche and moving towards a more comprehensive service designed for that specific niche. And this allows advisors to really further target their messaging and communication of their value proposition and service to those clients. And we've seen some really innovative niches at Hubli. We have some really rockstar advisors that we get to work with every single day. And one of the advisors that I always like to talk about, you've heard me probably mention him before, is he primarily works with online streamers and gamers. And so there's obviously been a massive growth in the gaming community and doing things like Twitch and YouTube, etc. And he only works with those types of clients because they actually make, one, a lot of money, but two, they actually run a pretty complicated business and need help managing their finances. And so that's just one way where you can see advisors, there's so many awesome niches of clients that you can basically target. And I think Michael Kitts has put it really well, is that the reason targeting a niche is important is because its differentiation is its key to successful marketing. Being in a very service-based industry, the experience you provide to your clients is really what's going to distinguish yourself from other advisors and also distinguish yourself from banks, robo-advisors, and any other relevant competitors that clients are comparing you against. And so this brings me to the third key industry trend. Because you're now a quarterback for your clients' finances, you're managing a more comprehensive service, you're trying to focus on a specific client niche, what that is basically resulting in and what we see happening is a lot of advisors are driving towards a need for operational efficiency. Because you're providing a highly complex service to a very specific clientele, you need to be operationally efficient in order for your team to really be able to provide that service at scale. And so the question is, how do you really turbocharge your operational excellence to drive and streamline your client check-ins, your ongoing maintenance and review processes? And those are really some of the best practices we're going to be talking about today. But I think, once again, McKinsey put this really well in one of my favorite articles about the future of the industry, which is called On the Cusp of Change, North America Wealth Management in 2030, is in the coming decade, the number of clients serviced by wealth managers will actually grow at an unprecedented rate. And this is primarily to really combat fee compression that I'm sure a lot of you experience. And so what advisors and their teams are really going to have to do is really turbocharge your operational excellence to really defend those profit pools, or it's going to be really struggle in the long run. Before we dive into the actual best practices here, I'm going to quickly open up the floor and to Q&A. So feel free to open up the Q&A box, ask any questions about industry trends. While people are populating questions, I'm also going to quickly launch a poll just so I can get an idea of where the audience is at with a number of the best practices that I'm going to dive into.
Louis, I have a question that came into me here if you have a second to answer it. The question was, how are workflows in Hubli different from in a CRM?
That is an awesome question. Thank you so much for asking that. I'm actually going to be covering quite a bit about the Hubli product when I go through the best practices and how we've designed our workflows. But ultimately, the way you can think about the difference of Hubli workflows is that Hubli's been purpose-built for financial advisor workflows. CRMs have always just been a really glorified database for client data, integrating with several data sources. And their bread and butter is not workflows, where ours is. And I'll be actually, throughout the best practices, I'll be touching on some of the core fundamental concepts that we've built into our technology around how that applies to financial advisors. And it'll give you a better idea of how our workflows actually work. And I'd highly encourage you to ask that question again at the end when we dive into questions after I talk about best practices. Awesome, thank you everyone. Just gonna end the poll there, share the results. Awesome, so just to run through a couple of the polling questions here. So at what frequency do you typically conduct client reviews or check-ins? Looks like the majority of the audience does them biannually or quarterly. And so that means you're managing a lot of meetings throughout the course of the year and check-ins with clients. And that's what we commonly see, is that quarterly and biannual are the most common ones. And so especially if you're providing a quarterly check-in model, today's session will be very helpful for you to figure out how to streamline that. The second question there was, what are the most important contextual variables that help you determine a client's service needs? Looks like the majority of the audience agrees that goals and values are what determine that. And so the contextual variables listed there are actually from the CFP curriculum. And so we'll be talking quite a bit about contextual variables because tracking them is highly important in order for you to really manage your client check-in and service process. What is the main way you track your client service record? Looks like the majority of the audience are using their CRM, which is awesome. Looks like a large majority are actually doing it in the notes segment. And so throughout the best practices, I'll be talking quite a bit about how to track your client's historical service record, because it's almost like having a treatment plan for your clients. And so we'll be talking about best practices for actually tracking that, so you can really always be on top of your client's service needs and almost predict and be proactive in which services are upcoming. And last question, what are you most concerned about? Looks like the majority of the audience here are worried about keeping things from falling through the cracks. And that's common. I speak to hundreds of advisors often, and it's one of the biggest concerns I hear in the industry. And I think it's because you're managing clients' finances. There's a lot you need to manage and track, and missing something could have a major impact on your clients' financial lives. And so making sure that you properly track and are proactive in making sure you're diligent in how you service your clients is important. So I'll be talking quite a bit about how to ensure and stop things from falling through the cracks through the best practices. Awesome. So for the best practices that we'll be reviewing here, these are really the best practices we've learned from, as I said, over 250 customers, advisors, and support team members who have onboarded onto our product. Hubli currently helps actively serve 110,000 end clients and the services that they deliver. And we've actually helped manage over 30,000 workflows for clients and services delivered to them. It's something we're really proud of in just our short time of being a company. But the best practices I'm going to be sharing are really rooted in that success of working with these advisory firms and making their workflows more efficient and proactive. For those that don't know, and I know the question came up earlier, is how is Hubli different than a CRM's workflow? Is what Hubli is we're actually a workflow tool, as I said, that is purpose built for financial advisors and their service teams. So we actually don't replace Wealthbox or Redtail, we sit on top of it. And what that means is we have a direct integration with your CRM. We leverage the data and information that's existing in your CRM to make your workflows more efficient. If you've ever used Trello, Asana, Monday.com, some of those industry agnostic workflow and project management tools, you can kind of think of Hubli similar to those, but we're purpose built for financial advisors. And so a lot of the tooling we've built out is to work the way you do. And so a number of key areas that we help with when it comes to workflow management is threefold. What we found is there's essentially three core workflow challenges that every advisory firm experiences. One is how to streamline your onboarding experience for existing clients, for new clients. And so what we see as the most common challenge is, especially when you start to scale your business, the first client that you onboard is very different than the 50th client you onboard. But the most important challenge we see when it comes to onboarding new clients is when you have multiple advisors or multiple team members involved in that process. How do you quickly actually take on different responsibilities to ensure that that onboarding experience is seamless for your clients? The second core challenge we witness is automating your client check-in process. As we just saw from that poll, the majority of people in this audience are actually managing their clients on a quarterly basis. And so the average advisor is managing 50 to 100 clients. And so you're managing 50 plus meetings every single quarter, which is a lot of scheduling nightmares, a lot of preparation, and also all the follow-up items that need to get tracked throughout that. And the last and most one of the most important ones we see is how to actually manage and track client projects. We've actually looked at the underlying data in our software, and what we found is that the average client has about 2 to 3 ongoing projects. And so if you're managing 50 clients, you're managing upwards of 150 projects. A client project can be anything from opening up a new account, doing a financial plan review, doing a risk analysis, a portfolio rebalance. How are you actually tracking and managing all of these ongoing projects for clients? Because ultimately, if those aren't delivered in a timely manner, your clients aren't necessarily making progress on their financial plan. I'm going to do a quick recap of the fundamentals that we teach at Hubli. And for those who have onboarded onto Hubli, you probably see some of these fundamentals that we teach through our onboarding process. And if you've attended one of our previous webinars where we've covered these, there's essentially 3 fundamentals that we recommend when thinking about that financial planning experience. First is to establish strong client planner relationships during the initial stages of that planning process or your onboarding process. 2 is how to actually properly communicate and implement your financial plan recommendations. And that's really that first year that you're working with a client, how to efficiently manage that big overhead of getting a client started. And lastly is fundamental 3, which is actually what today's webinar is going to be focused on, is how to monitor the results and track a clear service record over the decade that you're going to be working with a client. And at Hubli, we really refer to this at client maintenance mode. You've done the heavy lifting, you have an established relationship, you have the initial financial plan in place. How do you actually iterate and improve on that over a long period of time to consistently provide value to your clients and ensure that they're retained? And so, as I said, today we're going to be focusing on fundamental 3. And so fundamental 3, there's basically 3 core steps that we recommend. The first is to actually properly track your client's service needs. And so we'll be talking quite a bit about contextual variables in a bit here, but what we commonly find, and I speak to a lot of advisors, is they actually don't do a great job at categorizing their clients and segmenting the different types of service needs that they have. And so what we recommend is obviously doing a lot better job at tracking those needs so you can properly and proactively engage with your clients throughout life events and milestones. Once you've done that, we recommend maintaining client service records. As we saw by the poll, the majority of advisors and team members are actually doing this via their notes in their CRM. And even though this is an okay way to do it, it's not gonna help you really be proactive in servicing your clients, because you're having to search through just a jumble of notes that accumulate over many years. And it's actually very hard to know what you've done for a client. And the last one is to review and adjust. And I think this is one of the most common steps we see advisors missing, is they forget to review and adjust on a regular basis to better improve that ongoing service that they provide to their clients. An analogy I like to use is if you've ever owned a car and you've seen your service checklist that you receive from your dealership or from someone who helps manage your car check-ins, is dealerships have done a really good job at actually determining how often you need to check in with your car. And so they have this annual checklist or maintenance schedule for a car. And so we like to think of clients' finances in a very similar way, is how can you put together an annual checklist that you're conducting on a regular basis for all of your clients, and create a more standardized model for checking in with your clients every 10,000 kilometers, 30,000 kilometers. And it's a really simple way to think about that maintenance schedule. And so a lot of the best practices I'm going to be sharing here afterwards are related to creating that type of service schedule for your clients. Awesome. So the 4 learning objectives we're going to be covering today is, first, we're going to be talking about managing your contextual variables to effectively track your client service needs. We're then going to be talking about implementing a proactive financial planning check-in process. Afterwards, I'll be talking about tracking client follow-up items effectively through completion. And lastly is how to assemble a historical client service record, primarily for regulatory compliance, but also, less importantly, primarily for your own sanity and knowing what value you've provided to your clients over the course of your relationship. And so contextual variables are actually discussed at length in the Certified Financial Planning's designation 2015 knowledge topic. The reason they're important is because contextual variables actually help you properly categorize or segment your clients. And if you've ever used tags in your CRM, categorization is one of the most powerful and effective ways to actually create efficiencies in that ongoing service model. Because knowing what your clients needs when they need it is a big advantage in your ability to provide that proactive service to them. And I've spoken to hundreds of advisors, and very few of them are actually good at categorizing their clients, because it's really difficult to actually do that categorization properly. And if you don't actually do it, it's going to be very difficult for you to be proactive. And so here are some of the best practices for client categorization. And as in that poll, a lot of individuals on the call here do a good job at obviously tracking goals and values. And that's why they mark that as the big one. But there's actually 5 other very important contextual variables that determine your client's service needs. And so we actually think all of the contextual variables are important. Goals and values are obviously one of the biggest ones, but all of these contextual variables determine a specific type of service need for your clients. And so to touch on how Hubli actually helps with client categorization is we've built something directly into our product called service streams. And as you can see at the top there, you can see streams. It's the colorful little blocks there. And we try to really visualize and put up front what client service needs you have. And so in Hubli, this is actually what we call our client card. It's home base for client information, and it's a single page that really helps understand what's important to a client and what services are upcoming. And so what we recommend is, and what we see advisors doing, is they're starting to track in Hubli all of those ongoing service needs that clients have, and it really builds on top of those contextual variables. And you might be wondering, okay, great, I've heard about categorization a lot, but my CRM, it's another thing I have to track. What value does it provide? And so what we do in Hubli, and this is where we've gone a little bit further with our workflow technology than the CRMs have, is once you've done a good job at categorization, we allow you to layer on proactive automations against those categorizations. And so what we recommend is actually, here are the best practices for categorization that we encourage advisors to track, is to separate it by active clients and past and prospective clients. And so this webinar will be recorded, by the way, and posted on our YouTube channel if you want to get access to these best practices. But here's just a running list of some of the most important streams that we see our rockstar advisors tracking. Now, to give you an example of how powerful it can be if categorization is done properly in Hubli, is what we see advisors doing is they have in their CRM, they have their basic categorization done via tags, but then to actually use those tags, they're constantly running reports and mangling spreadsheet data to figure out what's actually important to the clients, who has what upcoming. And so what we actually allow you to do in Hubli is we have what we call an automation rule that you can create as part of a workflow. And so one of the most common contextual variables that advisors track is, when do you have a required minimum distribution upcoming for clients? And so what you want to monitor is, when do my clients turn 70.5 years old for me to actually really determine eligibility for them? And so in Hubli, we've built in a lot of different types of rules. And just to give you a use case of how contextual variables can be used is, let's say you have a service streams for tracking RMDs. You can then set an age-based rule in Hubli that adds a client into the workflow 6 months before their eligibility date. And so Hubli will automatically remind you that a client is now eligible for their RMDs. And so that's just one example of how powerful categorization can be in helping you actually provide that experience. Additionally, and so awesome, Mark, I just saw your comments in the chat that it's 72. You are right, and I forgot to update the presentation. We created it when it was actually earlier, so thank you. I'll do that update shortly. Ultimately, what this allows you to do is you've done a good job of tracking your contextual variables. What it's going to allow you to do is be proactive in your financial planning check-in process. Because you now know what services are important for your clients, you tracked all your contextual variables, you set up the automation rules to automatically remind you that those are upcoming, you can then be proactive in that relationship to your clients. And so what we see our rockstar advisors doing is that they're basically looking at all of the age-based and life milestones that their clients experience in order to determine all of these automation rules. And so here's a list of the most common proactive client check-ins that we see advisors conducting. And so what we see is that, for example, advisors are doing estate plan reviews, insurance reviews every 2 years. They're tracking when kids are turning 15 so they can start planning for college. They're tracking QCDs. They're tracking RMDs, as I mentioned. There's a ton of potential opportunities to essentially provide value to your clients. And so once again, how Hubli can help with this is, one, we have our service streams that allow you to track those big upcoming services for clients. But we also have something in Hubli called important client dates. These are fully customizable based on the service you want to provide to your clients. And so important client dates help you track when's the last time you did an estate plan review, last time you did a portfolio review, when's your ADV agreement going to expire and you need to do that, when's the last time you did a beneficiary update, etc. And so once again, here are some of the most common important client dates that advisors are tracking, once again, to be proactive in that service you provide. And so there's the milestone dates that we see very commonly, but there's also the recurring dates that advisors track. And so these are some of the common important client dates that we see advisors tracking in Hubli for every single client. And so let's say you do a really good job at tracking all of your important client dates. What Hubli allows you once again to do is set up rules to track those automatically, so you don't have to run those reports. And so in Hubli, we have something called a recurring rule. And so you can say, hey, Hubli, I want you to monitor all of my estate planning clients, and I want them to be added 2 weeks before their estate plan review date. And so Hubli will automatically monitor that for you and just schedule clients into a workflow at that given time. And that brings me to the learning objective number 3, which is, let's say you've properly categorized your clients. You've then put in a proactive check-in model where you're tracking all of these recurring and milestone-based dates. How do you actually follow through and track those items effectively through completion? Because if that's all done properly, you can imagine how much work is then basically generated for you. All these potential projects, all these things you have to execute on with your team, how do you actually track and complete those in the most effective way possible? And so what we commonly see is, and I'm quite happy with the group of individuals on this call, it looks like the majority of you are using your CRM, but more commonly what we find is that advisors are tracking all of these things in multiple places. They're tracking some of it in their CRM. They have a Google Sheet or an Excel where they're tracking some of it. Some of them use sticky notes or binders. A lot of them just rely on email and Slack or Microsoft Teams. And all of this information on the ongoing services that you need to proactively provide to clients are tracked in just a mess of places. And so what we recommend here is actually, to ensure that nothing falls through the cracks, is create a very consistent client check-in process. And what we recommend is there's actually 4 workflows that are the most important here. One is managing your client check-in scheduling process. And I'll actually visualize how we do this in Hubli in a second. Is a lot of advisors and their teams actually don't track which clients need to get a meeting scheduled. Having a place to track which clients are in the preparation phase, which clients are in the actual meeting, and then a place to track actually all of the follow-up items. And so here's an example of how we actually do this in Hubli is we try to visualize every stage of the client check-in process. So you can really effectively track all of those to-dos throughout the preparation, meeting, and follow-up process to ensure nothing falls through the cracks. It would surprise you how little advisory firms actually have a consistent check-in process in place instead of just reactively see a client meeting is upcoming, going through some sort of preparation process, but not really having it documented in a very consistent way. And so we visualize this via a client check-in meeting dashboard, as you can see on the screen here, to help you really manage that effectively as a team. And so that brings me to how to actually manage those client projects. And so you've put in a good check-in process that allows you to make sure that that's properly managed. But as we all know, there's actually client action items coming from multiple places. And so what we see is there's actually 4 common places that incoming client demands are generated from, or client to-dos or projects. And so generally what we find is during that meeting preparation process, there's inevitably always something you stumble upon, either a to-do that you might have missed, or an opportunity to work with your clients on a new project that you identified through the preparation process. And there's always to-dos generated through that. And so that's why we really highly recommend having a preparation workflow, because ultimately throughout that, there's going to be additional to-dos that are created for the client. And if you're interested in learning how Hubli basically helps you track that, I'd recommend scheduling a call at the end, a demo at the end of this. The next one that we see very commonly, where a lot of tasks are generated, is during the actual client meeting, you're having a conversation with your client, and everybody, there's always action items that are generated through that. And a lot of those action items need to be delegated to additional team members. And so Hubli helps you basically quickly and easily assign tasks for a client in a quick and proactive way directly in that meeting. And then the other 2 common place where we see client projects are generated from is those life milestones that I mentioned earlier, is what are all those proactive ways that you're looking to engage with your clients. And then lastly is just incoming client requests. A life change happens to a client, they get a new job, they have a baby, they're looking to purchase a new home. What are all those incoming client requests that you need to triage and manage and create needs-based projects for? The key point here is that the reason it's stressful and it feels like things are always falling through the cracks is that without having a process documented, the only way to manage and triage all of these requests coming from clients is really to work harder or faster, or to hire more people. And so what we highly recommend is creating workflows and processes to track all of these incoming requests and services from clients, so you can properly triage the same way a ER is run at a hospital. They quickly triage based on service need to proactively provide that to you. And so what we see some of our advisors have done a really good job at, and some of our rockstar ones that are really pushing the boundaries on efficiency and tracking, is this is a very common dashboard that they create. And this is our review topics dashboard, where you can quickly visualize all of those different action items that are generally generated through those 4 common areas. And so what we see advisors doing is that they have their tax projection and planning workflow, their estate plan review, retirement analysis, and they're essentially using Hubli workflows to really track all of those requests so that they have one place they can go to and see that Bill Bob is basically going through a tax projection and planning project and an estate plan review project. And so, as I said earlier during the call, what we see commonly is this is obviously a very oversimplified dashboard here, but if this is done properly, on average, we see advisors having 2 to 3 ongoing projects per client, with an average of 50 to 75 clients per advisor. And so there's generally 100 ongoing projects. It's no wonder you feel like things might fall through the cracks, because you're managing 100+ projects at any given time. And we highly recommend having one place to track that all. And that brings me to the last learning objective here. So let's assume you've done all of your you've done your contextual variable tracking. You have automations and rules set up to automatically remind you of what's upcoming. So you're very proactive in your engagement, and you've implemented a way to ensure that nothing falls through the cracks with tedious project tracking. What we recommend is obviously how to actually properly assemble and track those service records for regulatory compliance. And the best practice here is really build workflows. And the reason is that if you're going to do something once, do it twice. And this is actually something we highly recommend. Is what we see advisors doing in their teams is that a client project request comes in, and then they deliver that to the client, and then they basically don't actually document how they executed on it. And so they have to relearn that same process over and over and over again. And so we highly recommend actually investing the time and effort into documenting your processes in your head and really create a playbook for each one of those service operations. And so what that's going to allow you to do, and I think a lot of team members don't really think about the long-term return on investment here, is if you invest into processes, it's going to allow for two things to happen. One, it's going to simplify your training and onboarding of new team members. And two, it's going to help you audit-proof your firm and track clear client service records. And so how we do this in Hubli is, once again, if you look at the client card in Hubli, we basically allow you to quickly see what past services have been provided to a client. For example, here with Erin, you can see that she has basically completed the new client onboarding process on the completed workflows there at the bottom. And she's currently going through a tax projection and planning. She's going through a property and casualty insurance analysis, and also an estate plan review. And so what we commonly see is that this type of stuff is tracked via the CRM notes. And so you actually have a very hard time knowing what you've done for a client or what has been executed for them. But with Hubli workflows, we really try to make that really easy. In addition to that, to talk about client service record, is that this is going to allow new team members to quickly get up to speed about where a client is at and what they need to basically happen for them next. The second thing it's going to allow you to do is we actually have a CSV client report where you can actually export that report for any client, and you can do two things with that. The report actually looks something like this. It actually has a detailed list of every single task that has been completed for a client, the date it was assigned, the date it was completed, and who completed that task. And so this is very powerful when a client asks you, hey, what have you done for me over the last year? You have a full CSV report available for that. Additionally, this makes any audits really simple because you can quickly, with one button, provide a detailed list of everything you and your team has executed on for a client. And so to quickly recap some of the key takeaways from the best practices that we recommend to firms is spend some time and invest time into categorization of your contextual variables, because proper segmentation and categorization is going to allow you to be more proactive in your services. Two is look at your client niche and figure out what sort of age-based and milestone opportunities do you have in order to be proactive in your client engagements. Third is ensure nothing falls through the cracks by using workflows to actually track at all of your competing incoming client demands. As I visualized earlier, there's 4 places where you constantly have incoming client demands, and having a way to actually capture all those and triage them is really important. And third, if you're going to do something once, do it twice, and really document those processes in your head. And don't just memorize them, put them into a system, because it's going to allow you to easily onboard and train new team members, and it's really going to future-proof your business. If you're interested in actually getting started with some of these best practices, and you're not interested in adopting a new piece of software at this point in time, what I recommend is we've actually created a client service planning workbook. It can be downloaded at www.myhubli.com/client service planning. Tessa has actually put that link into the chat as well. And so I'd highly recommend downloading the service planning workbook, and it will help you start a conversation around these best practices with your team. Ultimately, if you want to learn more and get a product in place, Hubli would be the solution that's best on the market for that. But if you guys want to use Google Sheets or Excel, I'd recommend starting with this workbook. And the last thing I'll say is thank you everyone for attending today. Really love the attendance that we had. Feel free to contact me directly at louis@myhubli.com. Feel free to connect, even if you just want to have a chat about workflows and don't want to buy Hubli. I'm always looking to meet new advisors, and maybe there's an opportunity for us to connect as well. Please shoot me an email. And so thank you very much, everyone.